Hello everyone, good evening. My name is Kelsey Moore. I'm a PhD candidate in Film and Media Studies here at Santa Barbara, and I'm thrilled to be here with the director of Manzanar Diverted, Ann Kaneko, for this post-screening discussion. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you, UCSB. Yay, so much love. Thank you so much for having me.
So Manzanar Diverted is an independent documentary that you worked on for almost 6 years. Could you tell us a bit about how this project first started?
Yes. So this, I feel like it's so fitting to talk about this in because it really did come about through a humanities project, right? I was invited by a colleague, Jim Lee, who teaches at UCI, to be part of this team of scholars to look at Manzanar in kind of an interfaith, intercultural way, or not Manzanar, but really the pilgrimage, right? And so there were history scholars, Asian American studies scholars, and then Jim asked me, and I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? And he's like, oh, you're a filmmaker, you can do something. And so I said, okay, I'll come along. And I had just made, I had made this other film, A Flicker in Eternity, about Stanley Hayami's diary. And I think that Jim thought, oh, well, you've been doing this work in this area, so this might be of interest. I think, but really little, he probably didn't realize that I think for myself as a sansei, this story, this sort of, the incarceration story was something that I'd really been kind of hesitant to touch because there've been so many films, especially around Manzanar. And so I, maybe not reluctantly, but was, slightly skeptical, like, well, what can I bring to this space that's new, right? And so, but through this project, I thought, well, I'm really interested in the land, and I'm also really interested in thinking about maybe these parallels to Native American, experience, right? I vaguely knew of, how the Bureau of Indian Affairs had been, involved with the War Relocation Authority, and, had heard stories of how, Native Americans had worked at these camps. And of course, I knew that at Poston and at Gila River, especially these ties to Native American, these nations in that area in Arizona were very strong, right? Obviously, all of the camps, all of us are on indigenous lands, but those, those connections were very palpable. So I think it was really because of these kind of interests that then, I started to do research, and then was reminded that, of course, this was, Department of Water and Power land, right? And as someone who, was born and raised in Los Angeles, this question of water was always really important, and even though, of course, there's Chinatown, they're all in Cadillac Desert, there's all of this work that's been done about this water history, but I think it's just so hard for all of us to really grasp how a city 200 miles away can own this whole huge piece of land, this huge tract of land. And so I realized then that, this was a great opportunity to look at all of these stories together in this place.
That's great, that's great. So you mentioned the film you did on Stanley Hayami, A Flicker in Eternity, and this also explores the lives of those displaced and incarcerated at the sort of intimately archival way, which I think is such a powerful facet of your work. Could you tell us a bit about that film and any connections that you might have discovered between the two?
Well, so Stanley, so again, I feel like Stanley was my, I feel like as a a filmmaker, a young filmmaker, I had been sort of reluctant to look at this Japanese American history, maybe because I didn't want to be pigeonholed that way, right? I feel like many of us, there's maybe that expectation that we're supposed to be doing that work. But I realized, well, of course, this is part of my story, right? So I think Stanley allowed me to kind of, start to enter that space and be able to own that story, sure. Right? But my attraction to that story, I was invited by Joanne Oppenheim to work on that film, and it's such a charming story. He's so charming, right? And I also really looked at it as an opportunity to work with animation to sort of make his story come alive. And that's really my main motivation for making that film. And I feel like because it is, his voiceover, it's much more like a fiction film because it's constructed in that way. And so it allowed me to sort of, spread my wings in a different way in terms of formally, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So that film obviously focuses on Stanley, whereas this film predominantly features women at the forefront of Manzanar and Owens Valley history. And so I'm wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about how you initially connected with those outside of that sort of pilgrimage space, right? We've obviously got Kathy here, we've got Nancy, we've got Mary. So was this focus on women, both behind and also in front of the camera, intentional or at all part of the film's original conception?
So it's so funny. People always ask that. And then, when you're trying to raise money for a film, right? You're like, well, what are the grants that I can apply to, right? And we're like, oh, we can apply to Chicken and Egg because most of the main characters are women. But it really wasn't, something that I was thinking. It's like, oh, I'm going to make a film about women activists. That was not part of my agenda at all. It was just that it happened to be that way. And I feel like that's really a reflection of how women, because I see it everywhere. It's not just in this space. I see women really involved in environmental justice work, and I think it's because they care about health and they care about, both, I think, emotional, the trauma of these kinds of violences, and they're caregivers, right? So I see that in other spaces where I have and continue to work, and so it's really no accident, but it wasn't a deliberate choice on the outset when I started making this film. So in terms of how this cast of characters sort of became assembled, Kathy, was one of those first trips when I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but, I'll go talk to these people, right? I mean, sort of documentary it's a journey to sort of find a story. Even though I had, clearly there are these three communities, there are these stories which have to be somehow, embedded, woven into this piece. But Kathy very generously, allowed me to interview her. I got in touch through the superintendent of Manzanar. She's like, oh, talk to Kathy Bancroft. So, and we immediately hit it off. I think she's like, oh, you don't know what you're doing? Oh, that's okay, and I mean, it was also sort of like, it was a conversation, and I think she appreciated that I maybe knew a little bit more than most people do. When they ask questions, they're maybe not so informed. So I think she really appreciated that, and then I kept coming back. So we really became great friends through this process. And obviously, like Nancy and Mary, it's a small community. So everyone knows everyone, and sort of the players are very, it's kind of clear, right? And of course, Nancy and Mary are so important to the story. There's their father. Mm-hmm. Nancy is the mother of Rose. I don't know if you guys all could figure that out, but so again, these generations of commitment to this place and to, you know, environmental justice, you know, in that family is passed on, just as it is in the Embry family, right, with Sue and Bruce and Monica. So those all became these threads that, as we were editing and as the process evolved, it became clear that these were the themes that emerged from this work.
And so much of the film, right, is based in these sort of intergenerational threads, but it's also accompanied by the archival footage that you kind of intersperse between those testimonies. So on a logistical level, what was that process like? What was, the archival process like? Where did these images come from? Where did you find yourself searching for them?
So everyone always asks about the archive, right? And it's so ironic that the Japanese American history, I mean, although Japanese Americans were not allowed to take cameras into camp, the US government took it upon themselves to document this because they were trying to justify what they were doing. So it's very ironic because there is all of this documentation by the War Relocation Authority, right? They hired these photographers, Dorothea Lange, Ansel Adams, Francis Stewart, many, many people, right? Clem Albers. I mean, I have that to thank, and it's public archive, so it's not costly. So that's always good, right? And then there's also the footage that they filmed to sort of justify what they were doing. So the Japanese, and because now historically, everyone can agree that this was a bad thing, right? So there's been a lot of care in really preserving this history. So I feel like with the Japanese American aspect, or that piece of the story, was easier to assemble. Of course, there's luminaries like Toyo Miyatake, and and it's very clear from the photographs that his perspective as an incarceree himself is clear in the image making. So we have a few of his images. There's family photographs as the camps evolved. Incarcerees were allowed to have cameras. I mean, his story is amazing because he snuck a lens in. He was a studio photographer in Little Tokyo. He snuck a lens in, and he built a camera inside of the camp. And then he kind of got the, I guess the trust of the, Ralph Merritt and those who were running the camp. And so they allowed him to take photographs. And he really took it upon himself to make the documentation of Manzanar his work. And I think he had other people working with him. But they had worked something out early on that it's like he could set up the shot, but one of the guards would have to actually press the shutter. So anyway, there's that Japanese American archive, and obviously because of Stanley, although that was Heart Mountain, I was sort of somewhat familiar with the lay of the land with that, right? And then there's and so I think always it's important to try to find images that haven't been overused or used consistently, because all of these films seem like they use kind of the same images, sort of like, okay, can we find something else, right? But with the and then in terms of the history of the aqueduct, because again DWP was really interested in documenting this great engineering feat. Mulholland bringing this engineering feat where gravity is used to bring it to Los Angeles. There's lots of documentation of that, but it's ironic that with the second aqueduct, because I think that there was sort of controversy around it. When DWP, of course, it's kind of expensive to use their archive, so it's like trying to find other sources. It was harder, so it almost felt like, oh, they're trying to conceal this history or sort of hold this history back. In terms of the Native American archive, I mean, again, just as with the Japanese American archive, it's like there are certain images that are, used all the time. And so obviously over this period of time that I was making this film, you sort of learn what those images are. So it's, again, the challenge of trying to find some other images. It was really important to make sure that there was accuracy in terms of who these people were. So, found images of Numu, from Payuhunadu, not from, there's a big Paiute community in Nevada. So, again, the Eastern California Museum was really, really generous, and they have an amazing archive. So it's like every time I'd go, well, not every time, but because I was often shooting, but as we were getting closer to the end of the film, it's like I spent time pouring through and found some amazing images. And then, of course, there's like that archival image footage of from the boarding school in Bishop. So, but working with archival material, it's this process. You think you find some good things, but it takes forever. And then you talk to some other people, you hear about other things, you meet new people who have some other material potentially, documents, photographs. And so it's just like you keep digging into this space, and it's through these relationships. I mean, I think that what's so interesting also is like understanding kind of at an institutional level, like what histories were important at those times and how they wanted to present those histories, right? So I think those are all things that are kind of revealed through that process.
Sure. And I think one of the most amazing things about this film, and also one of the ways that it differs from a lot of the sort of previous, documentaries we have seen on places like Manzanar, is the way that it constructs time. And so I'm wondering, instead of chronologically following Payuhunadu's history, we sort of jump back and forth and we weave in and out of these different interrelations and interconnections. And so could you speak a little bit more on the film's visual construction and how you, as a filmmaker, tried to balance between all of these, archives and different types of media that you're working with here?
So it became very, very apparent early on that the metaphor of water was really important, right? Water and land. And, the documentary editing process, it's always about finding a structure to sort of frame your story, right? So it was clear to me early on that doing it sort of chronologically was not going to be very interesting. And I think we also kind of, we would get this feedback that there's too many characters. And I think there were more characters in it, and it's kind of hard to tell who was who. So we tried to pare back characters and then, make it more of a character-driven story. But it was very clear that it's not a character-driven film, right? It's this film about this place. All of these people are kind of these testimonials really are about this land and this water. And so these are things that I intuitively knew, but it's like through that process that it becomes very clear that really that is the way that this film must be structured, right? So we realized that the main character was the land and the water. And so that's, I think, it was to foreground that and use the stories to bring you through this story of this land. And, I think also with documentary construction and editing, its meaning is made through transitions between ideas, right? It's the juxtaposition or the contrast between different ideas. And so particularly because the film, is constructed from these three communities, it's like that was very, was really key in terms of how we would sort of build this story. So, and then it's the balance between communities, right? I think that's very tricky. It's so interesting because like right now I'm working on we're going to have a broadcast in July for a national broadcast, and so we have to cut the film down to 52 minutes and 10 seconds. And so, but, you know, in thinking about kind of what the essence of the film is, you know, I firmly believe you can edit anything, you can cut it down. But again, it's like trying to find that balance, you know, and I feel like it's interesting at the end of the process, we were getting a little pushback from the Japanese American community because they were like, we want more Japanese American stories. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I have, maybe it's my own bias against my own community. It's like, oh, we know those stories, right? So, you know, we tried to bring some of those stories back. And then right now in this cut also, you know, we've sort of pared back Nancy and Mary, and then, you know, Jin, who's my producer, was like, well, it seems like Kathy's, there's a lot of Kathy now, so it's like, how do we balance? So but it's this fine tuning of balancing of these stories, and especially because there are these 3 stories, right? I mean, obviously, I think given the history, it's not like the settler colonialist, the rancher story is not the centerpiece at all, but I do feel like they are part of this story. So,
And so much of the story exists in the film's sound and the ways that it uses music. So in some moments, sound works to sort of fill the desert and archival images with things like water and laughter and wind. And in other moments, sound recalls the violence of conquest and bombs and even, you know, Sue's cough. Can you tell us a bit about that process, about both scoring the film and using sound throughout the film?
I love sound. I love working with sound. I mean, it's kind of ironic because I have a visual art background. I started out doing photography, but I love sound because of its immersive quality and because of how it can transport you through places and through time. I think it paints imagery. I don't know, it was like, I think Ira Glass has this comment where he says that, you know, radio is the most visual medium because it, you know, evokes all of these things, right? So I knew that, again, similarly to, like, in terms of structure, that sound was going to help to take us, to transport us through time. And so that's really, I think, how these sound collages evolved in terms of making these, you know, it's a gesture to how we can traverse through these different spaces and these different histories. And then in terms of the score, I was talking to someone earlier. It's a feat that the score was made. You know, I actually had these dreams because the score, all of the composers are based up in the Pacific Northwest. Laurie Goldston was somebody I went to college with. She's an amazing cello player. She was actually the backup cello player for Nirvana on their last tour. And, you know, and she was in town once. I was totally like, we went to Ben Harper's house because he wanted to, like, you know, play with her. So I was like, sure, I want to go to Ben Harper's house. But so Laurie's somebody I've always really wanted to work with, right? And she has an immense range, but her work is really based in improvisation. So the score was all improvised. Wow. And it was, so I had these dreams of like, oh, I'm gonna go to Seattle and hang out with my friends and then just, like, you know, hang out with the cool musicians playing music, right? But it was COVID, so we couldn't do that. But you know, to Laurie and her team's credit, we devised this really interesting way of working, and she had Matt Chamberlain, who is a percussionist. I mean, you can look at his credits. He's done all kinds of, you know, Bob Dylan, you know, anyway, big names. But so he laid down a percussion track, and based off of the rhythms from the temp music that was in the film, and I feel like we had great temp music, And so he laid down this temp track, so it became kind of like a click track. And then she would lay cello over it. We had this other artist, she's a sound artist, Susie Kozel, who's based up in Seattle, and she laid a bunch of textures and, all these great sounds. And then Lori also played some guitar, and then Alex Miranda, who's, he's also indigenous, so I feel like he brought a real sensibility to the film, but he plays the imbira. So it was really this combination of the cello and the imbira, which really, I feel like, evoked this land. And then the shakuhachi was from George Abe, who he's based in LA. So, and then of course, most importantly, or not maybe most importantly, but very significant are the songs from the Akamaya group. Sage Romero, who's a performing artist up in Big Pine, very generously shared some songs, as well as there's Cheyenne Stone. There are a few peoples who shared songs, and Sage especially, because his mother got COVID and passed away, and so he wanted to honor his mother, and I was so touched that he let us use her songs. So I mean, songs are so sacred, and I was really very touched that he allowed us to incorporate them into the film this way. And then, the third person on the composing team is Steve Fisk, who, mixed all of these, tracks, all of these disparate tracks together. And for me, it was a really fun process. I mean, I felt it was very creative, even though I would have to listen and listen and listen. But
it's so amazing how every component of this film is connected to memory in some way. And I think that's sort of another idea that's under violence here, right? So we have Kathy and Mary and Nancy, they all talk about sort of the importance of memory and, this idea of outliving the people who remember as part of the LADWP's ploy, or cutting down trees to prevent silent witnesses. At one point, Kathy's aunt even recalls the moment where she realizes that the vanquishment of both peoples is one and the same almost, right? So did you find that many residents of the area were and are aware of these parallel histories, or is that violence against memory still ongoing in the area?
I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, obviously the people who I was involved with, I think, have an appreciation for this. But then there are those who I think choose not to engage with that past, or, I think kind of accept the situation. But it is ongoing. All of these things are ongoing. And it's ironic in some ways, while there is all of this violence in this place, there's always that strange contradiction of the fact that the LADWP owns this land is also why it's not developed. Right. Which is, and right now I'm working in the Inland Empire, which we were having a conversation earlier, and you said that your family was from the Inland Empire, and Highland, which is being, developed for warehouses, right? And so there's no protection in that way of this land. So I think about that as I see this rezoning and, this ravenous development happening everywhere, and all in the name of our logistics industry. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like, yes, there are some and there are others, but hopefully, I will say that when we showed this film in Payahunadu, last summer we had a tour, and it was really exciting because they were our first in-person screenings. So we took it to Mono Lake, so Lee Vining and Bishop and Big Pine and Lone Pine. And I feel like people really came out to see the film, and I think that everyone has a different entry into this history. They may know more about one history than another, but I feel like most everyone said, oh, I learned things that I didn't know. So.
And the screenings last July marked it commemorated the 1893 Forced March, and I know 63, sorry. Yeah. And I know that your first sort of work in progress screening of this film, right, was at the Manzanar pilgrimage in 2017. Is that about right?
I think so. It might have been at the Asian American Studies conference, but anyway, somewhere around there, yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit on the film's own role in sort of these commemoration practices and these practices of memory making, and how these communities have responded to the film and these messages.
I think that, people have been very welcoming, and I think, they appreciate the work. I think it's an opportunity for awareness and learning to happen. It's a little strange in that I think that the pilgrimage, which is so symbolic and it's so important to be there, hasn't happened for 2 years. And it's not going to happen this year because of COVID again. Mm-hmm. But, I think that these sort of alliances and hopefully reflection about memory, I mean, it's a little bit of an esoteric thing, right? That, it's meaningful in that way. Mm-hmm. And that it helps to motivate people to be engaged and to reach out to other communities. Mm-hmm.
So I've heard both you and Kathy talk about the sort of impact of this film, and that one of the film's takeaways is the importance of remembering locally. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit more about what that means and how we might put that kind of call into action?
So we are, as I mentioned, we're having this broadcast in July. So one of our impact, ideas is to really encourage people, because it will be a national broadcast, really encourage people across the country to think locally about the forced removals or, relocations of people based on environmental racism, right? Because I think that Native Americans particularly have been targeted historically, but, communities of color in general. And so that's one aspect. And I think that it's really been, it's important to remember what's happening, as the your amazing land acknowledgement at the beginning. It's like we need to remember those communities, right? And I think it's also an opportunity for people to come together, different coalitions, different communities who may not be thinking about these things together have an opportunity to think about our, or to become engaged because, to think about our environment, right? I think so many times, like social justice groups, they don't bring climate change or environmental activism into that formula, that space. So it's, that's kind of also what we've been really trying to encourage people to do. And, we also just, through Monica, who's in the film, she works with the Sierra Club, we've just, they've agreed to do some screenings, and we're hoping, we're going to be using the film to help talk about the Delta, the Delta, tunnel, thank you. That they've been constructing for a while. But I think that, again, it's all of these same water issues So, you know, we're really hoping that different communities all over can take the film to talk about these issues that are important to them. I think that there's also ways to think about, you know, trauma within especially communities of color around these issues, and this you know, activism, you know, between different generations of activists.
That's great. I'm so excited that we're all going to see it hopefully in July, right, nationally broadcasted. So looking forward to that. So right now I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful Emily Zinn for a couple of audience questions. If you would please wait until you receive the microphone to ask your questions so we can hear it here on stage. I'll pass it.
Hello. All right. Thank you so much, Anne, for an amazing film. Right over here.
Oh.
Yep. And thanks also, Kelsey, for facilitating this wonderful conversation. I think it was the last or second to last question from Kelsey spoke to, your response really spoke to how this film speaks to critical issues around environmental justice and climate justice. I also think, and you mentioned trauma, I think this film speaks to so many, a whole spectrum of key, significant national and global cultural conflicts right now, including, of course, the so-called debate over critical race theory, which is, as we know, is really an effort to quell any discussion of racism and white supremacy. But also, I think this film powerfully speaks to the current unprecedented surge in discussions around the possibilities of prison abolition. So I just wondered what you think about that, ways in which this film, this cultural product also centers communities that are not always centered in those discussions, and what that might speak to.
Yes, thank you. I mean, groups like Suru for Solidarity have really been thinking about carceral spaces. Oh, it fell down, sorry. I can project, what do you mean? So I think it's, again, I mean, the film, yes, the film has many reverberations in many ways, and it's just sort of like, well, which path do we go down, right, with the film? But, you know, in terms of the Japanese American community, there's this organization called Suru for Solidarity, and the incarceration experience of Japanese Americans, they've really been trying to think about that nationally and thinking about carceral spaces across the board, you know, prisons, you know, the border issues with migrant children, sort of this histories of, you know, certainly with Native Americans and Japanese Americans, these spaces where, you know, for example, my grandfather who was at Fort Missoula, you know, that was obviously a place where Native Americans were, you know, it was supposed to protect from Native American, you know, invasion. I mean, it's their land. So anyway, but so I think that there are definitely these groups. There's work in this you know, in this space to really think about these larger issues, critical race theory, you know, all of these things that, you know, hopefully we can bring to these groups. I think it's just about connecting with them, and I'm optimistic also that we can hope to take this, you know, to more of an international audience as well. We just got some critical funding from Doc Society, and they're really interested in, because I think these issues of colonization really reverberate and have meaning in many, many places. So yeah, we're really hoping that all of these different communities who aren't normally seen can also feel empowered to have conversations amongst themselves. You know, I think that there's many, many possibilities. So, you know, for any of you out there who have access or interest, we're always looking for collaborators. and hope that people can take it away, you know. I mean, that's essentially why we made this film, so.
I think one of the things that I found most shocking and disturbing was to see the land prior to the water being drawn out of that area, and that painting by Bierstadt of Lake Owens there, and I go, oh my gosh, this is so shocking. Is there much pictorial or photographic or any kind of visual record of what the land looked like prior to all this water being drawn out of that area?
So there's, there was documentation, obviously, when they were constructing the LA aqueduct, right? And so I think there's that documentation. It's a little hard to tell because it's black and white photography, maybe how lush it was. There is that Bierstadt painting, which, you know, for those of us who are in the area, we're like, which angle is he really painting the lake from? I think that there may not be, there may be some accuracy issues around that, but you know, there was one ranger at Manzanar who was like, which direction was this from? But the lushness of the lake maybe is some indication of how he found it earlier, right? But that's where story is important, you know, because there weren't always cameras there. I mean, I was looking for images of Camp Independence, for example, and, you know, I found that one, you know, the few images of the camp, and that, of course, was after they had already forced marched the Native Americans out of there. I think it was right before they were closing it down. So no, I don't think there are very many images. I didn't encounter any, but I think that there are stories, and that's, you know, we in our society, you know, we depend on these kinds of documentations like photographs, but that's where story is also is an important testament to our histories.
Yeah, thank you so much for such an amazing film. I wonder, what are your recommendations and insights and vision for what you wish to see in water protection? About 2 years ago, I was able to travel to North Dakota and learn from elders there about the water situation and the oil extraction that is happening. And I've also been able to have the honor and the privilege to work around a human research sustainable site to restore land and create regenerative practices. And it's happening here, even still to this day, in our backyard in Cuyama Valley, where there's research that shows that domestic municipal water is still not accessible, and yet we continue to extract. Here in Cuyama, we're extracting groundwater that predates us, you know, dinosaur age, let's say. And so what is your vision when we speak, you know, you're saying, let's unite fronts, let's connect with environmental justice organizations and social justice organizations, which are led primarily by BIPOC community. What do you see as something that is still so monopolized, capitalized, and violent towards our communities, knowing that water is what sustains us? I really love that imagery that you put of the elder with the children and saying, can you breathe air? Can you live without air? Of course we cannot breathe without air. The beauty of restoration of the elders who were building flowers in the gardens to sustain peace and serenity in their lives among so much violence. And so just want to see what your vision is for us, with us. Thank you.
I feel like you have a vision. I feel like we do need to stop importing water. We need to stop extracting water. I don't think people understand how long it takes for water to be cleaned and filtered through the ground. They don't understand that. So, you know, I feel like in terms of this film, it's my small, you know, gesture to help inform people to understand how important this issue is, that we can't continue to extract. But really, it's also, I think, a larger call to action to really question, you know, development and, you know, this rabid consumption that we're so accustomed to, right? Water, we'll just keep pumping water. We'll keep taking it out of the ground. We'll just keep buying more things. We'll just keep building more buildings. I think we really need to question all of that, you know, and I think that with, you know, the relationship between Payuhunadu and Los Angeles is the relationship in all urban areas, right? You know, areas that are adjacent to urban areas are extracted for water or extracted for, you know, or their contamination, you know, we're all part of the same, you know, air what is it? Anyway, the airflow, you know, connects us all. So all of these things, people, I think, just need to understand that they have a responsibility and that they can, you know, and these are not things that we can do individually, that we do have to become involved to help change these things collectively. And so that's our government, and I feel like, you know, that's the system that we live in right now. I do believe that it's individual, because we also have to understand and reckon with who we are in this world now. I mean, the climate change and climate crisis is something that, you know, we have to think about our children, our world. I mean, in some ways, maybe we can just say, oh, well, I mean, can we say that, oh, we'll just use this world up and then we'll move on? I don't think that makes sense, right? So, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's much bigger than all of us, but hopefully I'm optimistic that people can help to figure this out. I don't know. I feel like there's much smarter people than me.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you again, Anne, for sharing such a beautiful film with us. Thank you.